Hello, I feel like a newsreader. This is a different type of video for the channel. It's one where I talk about products or methods of doing things or how something works or what it's like to run a garage or just general stuff. I'm going to start with a subject which will get the comments flowing, and I know that most of it will be, well, not most of it, but a huge portion of it will be quite vitriolic. This subject does bring out the people who tend to spit things all over the screen while they're typing because they are that enraged by it. The subject today is waterless coolant. Yeah. This is not an advert. I'm not doing it for the company who make waterless coolant. For transparency, I have in the past sold this stuff. I have been an agent technically. My business has been an agent, although I've sold less than £500 worth, full stop. And half of it probably went to me. But what I have done more than that is I've learned how out the stuff. I've learned how it works. I've learned, sorry, I keep knocking the table, which is actually a Citroen SM bonnet. So because I'm someone who's used this stuff, sold this stuff, fitted it to a number of different cars, quite a variety of cars over the years, I think I'm in quite a good place to give you the lowdown. So basically this video is to explain kind of what the benefits are and to explain what you can expect if you put this stuff in your car. Things to be aware of, just giving you facts basically. It's not all good, there are downsides to this stuff, but when you bring everything into consideration, I think, well, the fact I have it in my own car shows I think that there are benefits to it. So we've got two jars here, two pickle jars, and one of them has waterless coolant in it, and the other one has regular antifreeze in it. I say regular antifreeze, it's the OAT 5-year rated stuff. The waterless coolant is that one? I've really not thought this through. Ugh. That just smells of pickle. Right, I've had a sniff and I've felt what they're like on my fingers. This is the waterless, so I'm going to put E on it. E stands for Evans, the company who make it. This isn't an advert for Evans waterless coolant by any stretch, I promise you it's not. But they hold a patent, I believe, on the formulation of this product, or this liquid, and it is solely for their distribution, that no one else can sell it, basically. And if anyone does try making their own, Evans just sue them. So I just refer to it as Evans waterless coolant because that's the people who make it, and there are no alternatives. This stuff is not a miracle worker. If your engine is not in good health, or if you have a cooling system problem or something like that, putting this stuff in it won't save you. It won't save the engine. It won't make it all better. In fact, if anything, if you've got an engine that runs too hot, putting that in it will only make it worse because it can't cool it down as much as the water. This is a myth that this stuff, if my engine's overheating, I'm thinking of getting waterless coolant. No, if you put waterless coolant in, your engine will still run too hot. If anything, it'll run slightly hotter and you still have a problem. And when it runs too hot, the mapping for the fuel injection, for example, isn't designed to run at that kind of temperature. You start getting pinking, you start getting issues like that. So you don't want it to run too hot. You can afford it to run a couple of degrees higher if you put this in, that's fine. But you can't have it overheat and then go, oh, well, I'll stop the coolant from boiling over. That's no good. You need to fix the problem. The car has to be in good mechanical health before you put that in. Otherwise, you're just not going to feel the benefits. Why are you fitting waterless coolant? What are your motives for putting waterless coolant in? What's brought you to it? Some people have seen it on wheeler dealers. Some people, myself included, noticed it on Jay Leno's garage on here. And I looked into it further from there, and then funnily enough was contacted. And when I was contacted by Evans, I have to admit at the time, I was sceptical. Like a lot of people, I was one of the people who went, oh, it's snake oil. I thought, well, all right, fine, let's get some. So I got some in. The car I put it in for test purposes was a car I knew well. It was a Citroen Saxo, a random car to try it in, but it was a car I knew was fine. The cooling system on it was spot on. I knew it very well. I knew how it behaved. I knew how it warmed up in the winter and in the summer. I knew what kind of power figures it would produce on our rolling road. We have a rolling road here. I knew everything about the car, inside out. The car's been in the family 15 years or so it was a good one to go with. I also knew it was quite a tough car mechanically, and if it did balk it somehow, I'd be able to fix it. So that car was fitted with the PowerCool 180, which is actually this stuff here. Classic Cool 180 differs to PowerCool 180 because Classic Cool 180 is green. The Saxo was converted, and I actually converted the car on the dyno, so on the rolling road. And when you convert a car to Evans waterless coolant, the first thing you have to do is drain the original coolant out of it, and then fill it up with a prep fluid. The prep fluid is hydroscopic, and the idea is you put this stuff in, it goes around your system, and it pulls out all the remains of any other water left in the system. Then you drain that out, and you fill it with waterless coolant. Now, of course, when you're filling a car with antifreeze, you're going to mix it with water, say 50-50 for argument's sake. So when you're putting this stuff in, you're just putting the whole lot in. And that means you need to buy the amount that you need for your complete cooling system, which in the Saxo's case was about 5 litres, 4.5, 5 litres, something like that. Evans claim that the coolant improves power of the engine, and this was the first thing I was massively sceptical about, having a rolling road here, having put a lot of cars on a rolling road and kind of get the feeling for how they behave on rolling roads. I wasn't convinced. And so the car was converted, and we tried doing a run on it to see what came out of it. 3 runs before, 3 runs after. I can't remember the exact numbers, but by the time I edit this video, I would have dug them out and put them on the screen for you. But long and short of it was, it made no discernible difference to power output. It may have even been slightly lower or slightly higher, but the amount it was by is negligible, because if you do 3 power runs on a car, one after the other, even on the same day, you will get 3 different numbers. And the idea is to take an average from all 3. If they're massively far apart, then something's not right, but you'll have one that's 100. I think the Saxo was kicking out about 130, 128, 130, and one run there will be 128.3, and then there'll be a 129.1, and then there'll be a 128.6, and that kind of thing. And the difference between the Evans and the antifreeze was basically nothing. It was largely the average difference between doing 3 runs and then 3 runs an hour later. One of the things we were able to do while the car was on the rolling road is, while it was at full chat, and I mean while it was undertaking its power run, which for some reason we thought it was a good idea, to remove the radiator cap and to show that it doesn't pressurize and boil up and kick over and everything like that. So that was the first car I converted. And what have I learned since? Obviously, one of the cons straight away for the waterless coolant is the cost. Because I don't even know what the retail is on this at the moment. But when I was selling it, it was £64.99 or 95 for 5 litres of coolant. So if your car takes 5 litres of coolant, you would need 65 quid's worth of coolant. But you'd also need 40 quid's worth of prep fluid. The prep fluid can be reused. You can run it through an engine, drain it out, and store it and use it 3 or 4 times depending on how much water you had left in the system. Obviously, the more water you had in your car, the less care you took to empty the system, the more water that prep fluid would have sucked up and the less effective it will become. So you need to, if you want to reuse it, make sure you got it as dry as you can. And that's why compressed air is your friend when it comes to getting water out of cooling systems. And you can check the water content. You can buy a refractometer and check the water content of the coolant and of the prep fluid. There is a theory that you could boil it. Well, not boil it, but you could take it up to 100 degrees in like a cauldron or something, and the water will evaporate back out of it again. I don't know if that's true or not. But so yeah, the cost is the main thing. You're going to be looking at £100, £110, something like that, maybe 115 when postage is added in, to do an average 5 litre cooling capacity on a car, which is not a huge cooling system. It's not a small cooling system, but it's not a massive one. So you need to take the cost into consideration. Of course, antifreeze, 5 litres of this antifreeze is about 25 quid. And you think, oh, that's only a 30 quid jump. I mean, well, only it's twice the price. But it doesn't work like that because, of course, half of it is water. So if you were to fill a 5 litre cooling system with antifreeze, you'd only use 2.5 litres. And the rest of it would be water, which, I mean, you do pay for, but well, maybe you don't. I don't know. Maybe you've beaten the system. So there is the cost to bring into consideration. The Evans lasts the life of the engine. It has no expiry date. It just lasts indefinitely. So that's one thing to consider to counter the cost. Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's worth. I don't think saying that it lasts the life of the engine is a valid counterpoint to the cost of it. Some people will say it is. I disagree, because this coolant here is rated for 5 years. After 5 years, the inhibitors begin to, well, basically chemically they begin to break down, and the antifreeze ceases to be as effective as it should be. You start getting corrosion, you start, getting blocked up coolant jackets and rust in your engine and all the bad things that come with it, and eventually head gasket failure and so forth. That said, this coolant lasts for 5 years. It's rated for 5 years, so you can, as long as you mix it properly and it's a clean cooling system, it's good for 5 years. So paying that is twice the price of that, and then that's halved again because of the water. I mean, you're talking, if you had a 5 litre cooling system, you're talking £12.50 to fill your cooling system up with coolant, and you don't need a prep fluid for it. Whereas this would be 100. Now that's going to be quite a few coolant changes before that starts to pay itself off, considering this stuff lasts 5 years. How many 5-year blocks are you talking before this starts making financial sense? It doesn't. That is not a valid argument, in my opinion, for waterless cooling. It's one you can tell yourself to make yourself sleep better at night, but it isn't a valid argument. Another problem with the waterless coolant is it's mucky. And if you need to repair your engine, for example, you need to change your aircon condenser, and the radiator has to be removed to do that. So most people would say, oh, I'll just drain the coolant out and put new antifreeze in it. Of course, if you filled it with this stuff, you're not just going to want to chuck it. You're going to have to keep it. And that means you're going to have to find something clean to decant it into. And that means that you will have to find some way of removing it from your cooling system without getting it covered in crud, because not all cars have drain plugs, and many cars have a hose. You have to take the bottom hose off the radiator, but what if that's covered in gunk and oil, and what if it comes out of there and it splashes down the body, or the cross member, and picks up all the crud and everything from that, and that all goes in your coolant, becomes a faff. And that is a very real con of this stuff. It's a down point of having Evans waterless coolant. It's a faff. Every time you want to get it out, for whatever reason, it's a pain. To counter that, and this is a valid counterpoint, the odds of you having to take it out are less. They're lower than if you have regular antifreeze, for a number of reasons. Firstly, this stuff, as I say, lasts the life of the engine. In fact, you could buy it for your car, and then if you decide to sell your car and you've kept the prep fluid in good condition, you could, having kept the prep fluid in your garage, remove the coolant from your car that you've had it in and put it in the bottle and store it and put it in another car using the same prep fluid. You could do that. If you've been careful about it and you haven't contaminated everything too much, you could do that. And this is where it starts to become relevant as to what car you're putting in and what your expectations are for it and why you're fitting the stuff. If you've got an old car that's used sparingly, it's a good thing. And if you've got an old car which has got a lot of old components in it and they're hard to find, they're rare parts for whatever reason, things like coolant hoses and expansion bottles and all that kind of thing, you can't just replace them easily. If you've got something old and obscure, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a car that Hubnut has. But yeah, if you've got something like that, this stuff can be your friend for a number of reasons. Firstly, it prevents corrosion. But yeah, there's no water in there to mix, and therefore there's no rust. It basically nullifies it. If you put it in a car that's been running water-based coolant for 20 years or whatever, it's not suddenly going to make it miraculously clean and clear. You will still get traces of crud, as the time goes on. And I've put this in Hilda, the Imp, and over time, the lowest points of that cooling system will get a little bit of silt in because it's left over from years ago. Yeah, but if you put it in a brand new car, which not in a brand new car, but I've put it in a fairly new build. If you put it in one of those, then yeah, it pretty much stays like that forever. Stays clean. So you get no corrosion, which means you're less likely to, aside from things like thermostat housings and whatnot, you're not going to have core plugs rust out from the inside out. You're not going to have the kind of problems that you get with water-based coolant. The other advantage with it is because the boiling points, and I shall talk about overheating in a minute, because the boiling points of Evans is much higher than the boiling point of that, your cooling system doesn't pressurise as much. It does pressurise a little bit, but not a huge amount. And because it does that, it means it's got a lower, there's less stress on the cooling system components. There's less stress on the expansion bottle, which could be brittle plastic. There's less stress on the hoses, coolant hoses. There's less stress on any plastic manifolds or housings or anything like that. And if you've got a car that's got rare components on it, that could be your friend, because if you blow any of those or break them because they've got 15 psi behind them and they're 30 years old and they suddenly decide they've had enough time being under the bonnet of your car, you could be stuck. So this stuff could help you from that point of view. An interesting point to note is why cooling systems are pressurised, and that brings us into another sort of pro-con area. Cooling systems don't pressurise by accident. They're designed to pressurise. They are intentionally pressurised by manufacturers at design, and some cars have a lower pressure cooling system. Some cars don't have a pressurised cooling system. They are designed to run cooler. But certainly anything from the last 40 years will have a pressurised cooling system. And the reason for doing this is because if you pressurise this container, so if I take this lid off and put this over a Bunsen burner, which I don't have because I'm not in school, but if I did and I put that over a Bunsen burner, ignore the fact that wow, that smells a pickle. Ignore the fact that it's got antifreeze in and that does muddle things very slightly. Say the boiling point of that is 100 degrees C. If I then do this, put the lid on it, seal it, and go again, this will try evaporating into this. This won't let it because it's getting full of gas, and the whole thing pressurizes. And when it pressurizes, the boiling point of that rises. It's not entirely in line. A cooling system that's pressurized to about 15 psi, boiling point of that coolant's gone up to about 120 C, 120 Celsius, something like that. So it does. There is a reason why they do that. That is deliberate. It is to raise the boiling point. But the reason why an engine needs to run quite warm, a normal operating temperature on most cars, let's say, as an example, is around 80 to 90 degrees C. Most cars have a thermostat that will open between 75 and 85, and most cars in traffic, coolant fans will be kicking in around 90, 95, something like that. So they don't want to go much higher than that. They don't want to go above 100, really. They want to, and on the motorway, they might sit in that kind of 85 region, something like that. The thermostat takes care, basically, of keeping the engine where it wants to be. And the reason the engine wants to be around that kind of figure is because when you burn stuff, and when petrol's included, you get water, you get moisture as a result. And that moisture will, in time, find its way into the oil because it will get past the pistons, past the piston rings and everything, and your oil will get moisture in it. It's normal when it happens. That's why cars that only do short journeys get all gunky in the oil. And the reason they get gunky in the oil is because the oil doesn't warm up as quickly as the coolant. And the oil needs to warm up to burn the water off, and to boil it off. If the oil goes above 100 C, which it regularly does in engines, any moisture in that oil will be turned to vapor, to water vapor, and it'll be coming out the top. You see it when you take an oil cap off a hot running engine. And it's important that it does that. Otherwise, the oil just gets filled up with moisture and you end up having mayo and a bad time. You wear your engine out early. So they have to run hot. The problem is the coolant that is intended to keep that engine from going too hot, its operating threshold, its window that it can handle, is just above the point the engine wants to run at. So you've got this 0 to, I'll do it this way around, 0 to 100, right? The coolant can only operate, it can go no higher than that. And the engine wants to operate around here as well. It's not ideal. You have to pressurize the cooling system to bump it up a little bit to try and keep the coolant contained. But of course, in pressurizing the cooling system, you put in components under strain. Yeah, sure, they are designed to be pressurized. That's, you know, when the engines are designed, when, you know, the cooling system's designed, they're designed to be pressurized. They know they're going to be pressurized when they do it. But if you took the pressure away, that's good. And that is the advantage you get with this stuff. You don't have to pressurize it. In fact, with the Evans, you can fill it high. You don't need to leave as much room for expansion because it won't expand as much unless you get to 180, which is the boiling point of this, 180C. If you go that high, yeah, you're going to need the expansion room. But if you go that high, you're going to have broken down way before that. So yeah, the coolant's operating window is now no longer that with this little tiny bit up here. It's actually off screen. The engine wants to operate kind of at a halfway point. If the engine wants to run at 90 degrees C and the coolant can handle 180, it's smack bang in the middle of that operating window. So that is an ideal situation to have. It needs to be a wider operating window because this is less effective at pulling heat out than this. Because water is pretty much the best thermal conductor you can find. So in terms of which one of these is better as a coolant, as just cooling something down, nothing else, it's that. Of course it is. Easily. I think Evans is 68–70% as effective as water. And consequently, with Evans in it, there is a chance your engine will run very slightly hotter. It is nothing like the numbers that some people have put out there. Some people said 30% hotter or something like that, because it's 70% effective. Your engine will run 30% hotter. No, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. In doing the rolling road test that I did, I measured the temperature of the engine in the middle of the full bore test, and the difference in the two was around about 2.5 degrees C. It's negligible. You can class that as a disadvantage, but it goes both ways. Sorry for hitting the table bonnet. It goes both ways. There's an added advantage of it being less effective than water. I mean, you're looking at the screen going, advantages of not being as good. This is going to be a hard sell. Hear me out. When you're driving down the road, there are two issues with warming your engine up. Well, there's 2 points actually towards the same thing. You want to get to normal operating temperature in your engine, because when you're at normal operating temperature, whether it's, I mean, if it's a carburetor car, it's a little bit more robust, but if it's fuel injection, there's a lot going on. And fuel injection will be altering the fueling and the mapping dependent on the temperature of the engine. The engine wants to run at its normal operating temperature. That's when all its bearings are in the right tolerance. That's when all the camshaft and everything is in the right tolerance. It's getting the oil fed to it at the right rate and everything like that. It's when it's happy. It can run outside of those windows, but it will accelerate the wear, which is why you should avoid just doing short, cold journeys all the time. The fact that the coolant isn't quite as effective as that one means the engine warms up faster. And this isn't something that I've seen people mention before, so there's every chance I'm an idiot and it's wrong, but this is my logic. The engine warms up quicker. And I know the engine warms up quicker because in said Saxo, if I was to start the car and go from my house, the heater's kicking warm air out probably a good half a mile earlier. It's starting to blow warm air. It's starting to blow warm air out pretty quick, whereas before it would take a mile up the road before it was starting to blow warm air out. And so there are advantages to that. That means it's warming the engine up faster. It means the oil is warming up faster because the coolant warms up so much faster than the oil. People, when they want to take their car out for a thrash, they wait until their cooling system warms up. It's pointless, because the oil is the thing that needs to warm up, not the coolant. The oil is the more important thing. If you haven't got an oil temperature gauge, you don't know how hot your oil is. It takes longer to warm the oil up than the coolant. And for that reason, the Evans is doing you a favour because it's letting the engine warm up quicker. It's not letting it get too hot, but it is letting it warm up faster. And that's good for your oil, and that's good for your engine because it gets its normal operating temperature quicker. So your engine warms up quicker, this is a good thing, but does your engine run too hot if you've got this in? Bearing in mind this isn't quite as effective as that. This is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated. This coolant is capable of going up to 179°C, let's say, and that's a good thing. The chances of it saving your engine in the event the engine runs too hot are good. They're strong. I know they are because I've seen it happen. The problem you've got with water-based coolant is that when it goes past the boiling point of that liquid, it stops being a liquid. It starts being a gas. It starts being steam. Steam isn't the white stuff that comes out the top of steam engines. That's actually water vapor. Steam's invisible. Steam is just superheated water. It's a gas. And you get inside cylinder heads and next to the cylinder jackets or bores or whatever, the hottest parts of the engine, you get little steam pockets. If there's a cavernous, or not cavernous, if there's like a domed area, if there's an area where gas can't burp itself, it can't get out, you get steam pockets. And steam, believe it or not, doesn't cool stuff down. So you get parts of the engine which effectively have no coolant in them, and you get hot spots. And that is how you start getting damaged. That's how you start bending cylinder heads and making cylinder liners eat their way into the bore, especially on like a K series 1.8. The cylinder liner drops below the height of the deck of the block, and the end of the block is scrap, basically. That's what happens. It gets too hot, overheats. The coolant boils, and so you start puffing steam everywhere, well, water vapor everywhere. Your expansion tank starts making farting, gurgling noises, and the cap lets go, because the cap is designed, when it goes above 15 psi, if it's a 15 psi system, the cap is designed to let it go. It's like it's gone too high, let it eject, because otherwise it's going to break something. So that's what that does. But quite often by that point, the damage has been done. With this, I have first-hand accounts of cars that has saved, including my own. I once drove my, I have a Citroen BX 16 valve, which I once drove up north somewhere. Up north is north of Basingstoke, isn't it? I went up north, I think I was on the M1, cooling fan relay, died. I was sat in traffic on the M1, contraflow, roadworks, no hard shoulder. Got to keep moving. Luckily, I had this stuff in it. The temperature gauge went off the scale. That goes to 120, and it went right off that, because there's no cooling fan. It was the middle of summer. Heater's on full chat. It's not doing a huge amount because the heater matrix is this big and the radiator is this big. You can make up the rest. But the engine was okay. It survived thanks to this, because although this isn't as effective as water at pulling heat out, it remains liquid way past 120, all the way up to 180. So it remains a liquid. So it is still drawing heat out. It might not be quite as good at the water at doing it, but it can do it for longer. The engine was saved, despite the fact it went stupidly high. And although the engine was okay, it is clear, just because this coolant can handle going really, really hot, doesn't mean you should, because there are other components in that engine bay that are not designed to go to 180C or 140 or 120. In fact, this stuff is capable of going to 180, but you want the engine to run at normal temperature. The ideal scenario in fitting waterless coolant to your car is that the engine runs exactly as it did before. It heats up very slightly quicker, maybe, but that's it. You don't notice any other change. That is a successful conversion, and that sounds stupid to say. You think, well, why the hell would I want to buy something and not notice a benefit? The benefits are hidden, and the benefits are long-term. They're not necessarily going to show themselves straight away. If you've got a car that, you know, you stick it in and you have problems with it, let me know. I'm interested. What problems have I had, personally? One of the things I have noticed, funnily enough, on the Saxo, is that it is now running hotter than it used to. That's not to do with the coolant, well, not directly. I don't actually know for sure what it is, but I think, well, I have a theory. My theory was that a couple of years ago I changed the cam belt, 2019, I changed the cam belt, it was due. And when I did that, I did the water pump as well. The water pump I put in was a slightly different design to the one that came out. That happens, the impellers do change shape slightly, and generally you want to go for the genuine parts. There's a reason why. They do tend to work the best, or the people who make the genuine parts. Of course, Citroen don't make parts for the Saxo. Citroen buy them in from somebody and put them in a Citroen bag. So if you can figure out who makes them for Citroen, you're winning. I didn't, because whatever I put in there was different to what came out. Having done all that work, the car ran hotter. And the only thing I can think I changed out of all those components was the water pump that would make a difference. The water pump perhaps slightly less efficient than the one that was in it before, possibly. Now I've never noticed that before, but then of course I've never driven a Saxo with coolant that isn't quite as effective at pulling heat out as normal coolant. Could it be that that coolant is finding the weakness, the weak point, the weaker state of that water pump that's gone in it, or coolant pump as it now is? Yeah, it highlighted that. And that's not a good thing, really, because it would have been, I'd been happier if it just kept running at the same temperature. It doesn't overheat still, but... So that's one downside I've noticed. Basically, the long and short of it, we can sit and talk all day about it, the long and short of it is there are advantages and there are disadvantages of the coolant. It's a long subject, there's a lot to it. If you want to read into it enough and learn about it and figure out whether you think it's the right thing for you or not, is your prerogative, but do your reading and do your research. I'm just trying to give the facts. There is a lot of misinformation out there. In fact, I've read more misinformation than actual information from various sources. There's simple pros and cons. This stuff is not as good at cooling your engine as this stuff, the original antifreeze mix, whether it's the blue 2-year stuff, this stuff which is 5-year. I did some Mazda stuff the other day which is rated to 20 years, which starts to bring into the whole last life of the engine thing. Well, how long do you keep the car? And even if you keep it 20 years and you have to change the coolant once, not the end of the world, is it, for 20 years? I think, yeah, you need to consider if your engine's in good operating health and it isn't overheating, it's running absolutely fine, then you view this stuff, waterless, as a means of preserving it. It's perfect for classic cars and things that don't do a lot of miles and things that sit around over the winter, because antifreeze, regular antifreeze, is not mileage dependent. People will say, oh, I changed my coolant, but it's only done 2,000 miles, I'll just leave it in there. It's time dependent. Brake fluid and antifreeze is time dependent. It's not like engine oil or an air filter or something like that. It's time dependent. So if you put it in there 5 years ago and you've only driven it once in 5 years, A, why have you got it? And B, if you've only done that, your antifreeze is knackered. It needs changing again. And it stops resisting corrosion, and it stops resisting freezing up and things like that. So you have to change it. And if you've got a car that doesn't do many miles and it does get winter stored, you don't take it out over the winter, and you want something you can just fit and forget, and it isn't rusting, it isn't corroding, it's not getting any worse, that's good stuff. That is a very, very worthwhile reason for having that. As I say, the other reason is you've got a car with rare components, rare expansion tank, hoses, oil heat exchanger, things like that, things that you don't want them to fail because you can't get other ones easily. That's not to say they're never going to fail, even with this stuff in. There's less chance of it because it's not pressurising and it's stopping the corrosion from getting in there. So your engine's being looked after. It's not going to get rid of corrosion that's already in there because that's not what it is. But it stops it getting worse. Treats everything with a film of oil. And it's really like a very thin oil. I don't know what it's made of. I imagine it's glycol based with some agents in it that stop it being like syrup, because it's a little thicker than normal coolant, but not much. Yes, it will stop the car from boiling over, but it won't stop it from overheating. That's the difference. Overheating means it's running too hot. Boiling over means the coolant's let go completely and had a breakdown. It will stop that if you keep pulling over on the side of the road with steam pouring out your bonnet because your cooling system can't handle it. That will protect the engine, but it won't stop it from getting that hot. In fact, if anything, it'll get hotter, like I say. And it getting hotter is still bad. You don't want it to happen. The only thing that this is doing is giving you a safety barrier. It's giving you a net. It's stopping it from killing your engine. The engine is likely to be okay. Not always. I'm sure there are some cars that have died on that stuff as well, but I don't know any. And I know some cars that have had, well, if they were on this stuff, the water-based, they would have been toast. Soggy toast. So that's what you're doing. You're asking yourself why. If you've got a cooling system that is fine in your classic car or whatever, and you want something you want to put in your engine that is fit and forget, this is good stuff. So to summarise, cheaper, better at pulling heat out of things, but comes with problems. The operating window of the engine is very close to the edge of what that can do. Operating window of the engine is miles away from the edge of what this can do. Therefore, this is safer, but it will run very slightly warmer, probably, and it is expensive, and it is a pig to work with. But the other benefits that it brings, in my opinion, negate the cost. I mean, if you're talking about a car that is your pride and joy, and you spend money on it, and you lavish it, and you look after it, and whatnot, you want to try and keep it as original as you can, with original hoses and original header tank and everything like that. That's probably the thing to go for. There is a lot of misinformation, a hell of a lot of misinformation. It isn't snake oil, because snake oil means selling something that doesn't actually do anything. And this does. I've seen it. I turned up at Festival of the Unexceptional with a BX running at about 110 degrees and took the radiator cap off in front of everyone. And hopefully there's someone watching this who was there when I did it. It just went... So it's not snake oil straight away, because it is not doing what that will do. It is doing something different. If you have a question about this, pop it in the comments. I will try and answer what I can. If I don't know the answer, I will say I don't know. But I've learned a fair bit about this now, and there's not a huge amount I don't know in layman's terms. I mean, you can go into like the scientific molecular structure of each liquid and the compound and everything like that. No idea. But in the real world, I can tell you what happens when you put one in your engine and the other one in your engine. I know what the differences are. One of the downsides I hear people say about with this stuff is that if you get a leak or something like that, you're stuck. And that's not true. There are two sides to that. Firstly, you are less likely to have a leak. Because the cooling system isn't pressurizing, you're much less likely to blow a hose. A lot less likely. And if you've got a leak, and you spring a leak when you've got this stuff in it, in your engine or cooling system, it definitely would have come quicker with this. Whether that is a good or a bad thing, that's just down to whether you're suffering from good or bad fortune. But yeah, if it blows a leak with this, it definitely would have done with that, because that would have been fighting its way out, whereas this one doesn't. And if you do find yourself with a leak at the side of the road and you have to patch yourself up on the side of the road, and you, as an emergency, you need to get going, and you've lost most, half, 3/4, whatever, of your coolant, you can put water in on top of that. It will work. It will basically then behave like normal antifreeze. You basically just, it's not neat antifreeze. I thought it was originally, but it is not. But yeah, you can do that to get you home. Obviously, you ruin the coolant doing it, and you've lost your money, but you got home. So yeah, that pretty much brings us at the end there. A hell of a lesson. I feel like this has been a lecture. Thank you for coming to my bonnet. And yeah, one day I'll do a conversion on a car and we'll film it, and I'll show you exactly how you do it. Like I say, this is no advert at all. I don't sell this stuff anymore. I can't supply you with it. I don't have it here. I'm just now really speaking as someone who's converted a good number of cars of varying types, and I run it in my own cars, and I have first-hand experience of what it's like. Anyway, hopefully that's given you some information. Whether any of it is any use to you or not, I don't know, but I hope it's answered some questions. Yeah, look at it from a real-world perspective. A lot of the stuff you read is rubbish. Just ask the people who actually use it. The people who actually run this stuff in their cars will tell you, they should tell you the pros and the cons. There are downsides as well, and that's what you want. To make your informed decision, you need both. And there's no point, some people will be of the mindset where they won't say anything bad because they've already paid for it. They want to save face. And that's stupid. There are downsides to it as well. So if you have any questions or whatever, pop them in the comment. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.